Tonight, for the first time in 16 years, I'm going to teach on Halloween origins. Actually, I'm not going back to the beginning, where I believe this all started. And you would have to take it back all the way to the post-flood era if you want to do a history timeline on this pagan holiday that comes from a pagan festival practice. I know many of you are probably saying, I didn't know it went back that far. Yes, it does. And I'm just going to read you the information tonight. You do what you want with it. Do I think God's going to fall off his throne because you pass some candy out? No. I make sure they have a bookmark or informational card to go along with it. Because the kids are innocent. They don't know. Their parents are clueless. And most people are. They just think it's an innocent, fun holiday. Let's look into it. Halloween seems to differ from all other holidays celebrated in the United States in regard to having it multiple secular, religious, and occultic connections. It is celebrated on October 31st. While Halloween practices seem to stem mainly from paganism, we need to see all of the issues. First, we will start with the ancient history. After the flood of Noah, some commanded the observance of the equinoxes and solstices to practice repentance, having family fellowship, and study prophecies. The flood came. The date the flood came was set aside to remember God will not always tolerate sin, and to remember the water and fire judgments predicted to come upon the earth. Genesis records the exact date of the flood began. In Genesis 7, verses 10 to 12, it reads, "And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the 7th day, were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Maybe next year, because it would fill in more details. I'm not going to do it this year, but maybe next year on Halloween, I will get into the equinoxes and solstice to show you, dig a little deeper in how this pagan festival and holiday came into fruition. According to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, the 17th of the 2nd month would be Iyar 17th, which fall in mid-April to mid-May. If we use the Pharisee calendar, the date of the flood would be placed in the autumn. It would be Chesvan 17th, which falls in our mid-October through mid-November. The 17th would fall around October 31st. Today, most pagan groups celebrate it on the full moon closest to October 31st. As far back as anyone can remember, it was the Day of the Dead. But the pagans turned it into a celebration of idolatry. When you walk into a store in October and see all the Halloween decorations, remember, if there was no flood judgment, there would be no Halloween. The fact that Halloween exists is a testament to the fact of God's judgment of sin. When you look at Jeroboam, after the United Kingdom split into Judah and Israel, Jeroboam, the king of northern kingdom of Israel, did not want his people going to the temple in the southern kingdom of Judah. Jeroboam said in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 27, "If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah." So Jeroboam recreated the calf idols that the Israelites made when they first left Egypt. Jeroboam also recreated the ancient festival of the full moon of the 8th month, or the full moon of October, called Halloween, to be celebrated in Israel in place of the Feast of the Tabernacles. Let's just read it. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 12. We'll start with verse 28. Whereupon the king took counsel, that's Jeroboam, and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold the gods," not the God, "gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." He's giving the credit to the false gods of Egypt. "And he set the one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. And this thing became a sin. For the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And he made a house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar and burnt offering. Now, if you notice in verse 30, it says that the thing became a sin. Observing the day of the flood and honoring God with repentance is not a sin. But to turn the observance into paganism with calf idols turned it into a sin. In the AD 800s, the Pope started Mass to be said for all the martyred saints. This was called All Souls Day and was held on the 1st of November. The night before was called All Hallows Eve. In time, the name changed to All Halloween, and finally to Halloween. The focus changed from remembering God's judgment to remembering the Christian martyrs. The medieval church started teaching that the bones of saints were holy, and if you paid great amounts of money, you could touch them and possibly be healed. Then the church started selling other fake relics, eventually indulgences. If you bought an indulgence, you could go out and sin because it was paid for in advance. So if you died, you would still go to heaven. All these things would take place on Halloween. The twisted mixture of Christianity and paganism so outraged one godly man that he vowed he would change it or die trying. On Halloween, on 1517, Martin Luther nailed 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Church to protest these and other Roman Catholic dogmas. This marked the date of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Let's look at the Druids. The ancient Druids kept records of their beliefs, but the Roman history records that Caesar ordered all Druid records destroyed in much the same way that Alexander the Great ordered the records of the Georgians destroyed. It was mainly from their vile religious practices. Most of what we know about the ancient Druids come mainly through the oral traditions from Ireland or from others who wrote about them. In Ireland, today Halloween is still known as the Vigil of Samhain, or Samhain, pronounced Samhain. The pagan priesthood of the Druids in Ireland and northwestern Europe believed that Samhain, the lord of the dead who controlled the underworld, would gather together all the souls of those who died that year to purge them of their sins. He did this by transmigrating their souls into the bodies of certain animals for a time, a type of purgatory before they could go to the Druid heaven. Just think about that. All the souls would go through a purging, and they would go through it through a certain animal for a time. It makes you wonder, how could people even believe this stuff? But they did, and they practiced it. He could also be coaxed into giving lighter sentence by the gifts and prayers of living relatives. It is interesting how similar these ideas were to the problems Martin Luther had with the medieval church. And I've said this many times. Shortly after the flood, all the pagan practices, festivities, started up shortly after the flood. You would think the offsprings of the 8 people that did make it through the flood, protected inside the ark, would have had enough influence, at least for, let's just say, for a few hundred years. But even that, they didn't last that long. They quickly went back to their pagan practices. It doesn't seem strange. It was shortly after they debarked from the ark, a sin was committed with incest inside the family group. It doesn't matter what you go through. It seems like man is hell-bent of destroying himself. Even with all the warnings, even with all the visuals, as those 8 individuals saw in the ark and outside the ark leading up to the flood, you would think it would at least scare the bejesus out of them for a few hundred years. And their offsprings, by the stories they would tell. Man is hell-bent because of sin in destroying themselves no matter what. Thank God for Jesus. But let's continue. It is interesting how similar these ideas were to the problems Martin Luther had with the medieval church. Some of the paganism said to be associated with the Druids were, 1, bonfires. Bonfires, actually called bone fires, were a form of divination, used to predict what was to come in the following year. A human being or animal was placed in a large wicker basket and burned to death. How evil is that? Putting a human being in a basket to be burned to death so you could participate in some divinating practice, which is a wicked, evil practice. The pagans believed that the way the victim died and the form of the charred bones, like tea leaf reading, would tell the future for the next 12 months. Black cats. Black cats are supposed to be familiars, spirits who possessed animals and worked with druids. Here's one. Jack-o'-lanterns. On Halloween night, druids were said to sacrifice humans to demons to gain more magical power. Jack-o'-lanterns were originally made out of turnips, but in America, the pumpkin came to be used. These would be used for lanterns. The candle was made partially from the fat of the human victim. Each jack-o'-lantern seen means a loved one had been sacrificially murdered. That's its origins, friends. I see so many churches, year after year, having pumpkin carving evenings or get-togethers. They don't have a clue where this started and the meaning and purpose behind it. I'm not saying you're going to lose your salvation. I think I've made that very clear over the years. But it puts it in the same category as the Acts 15 group, where they were arguing back and forth with each other. James on one side, Paul on the other, everyone in between. The one thing they finally did agree on, one of the things they finally agreed on was animals that were sacrificed to false idols should be avoided as food. They probably would have thrown in jack-o'-lanterns if they were alive today. Kind of fits in the same category, doesn't it? Let me read that to you. Jack-o'-lanterns were originally made out of turnips, but in America the pumpkins came to be used. These would be used for lanterns. The candle was made partially from the fat of a human victim. I bet you can never look at another jack-o'-lantern the same if you didn't know this information. Each jack-o'-lantern seen means a loved one had been sacrificially murdered. Now, I'm not saying this is a practice the masses are involved in. Probably some satanic occults, groups. It wouldn't surprise me still practice this. In fact, there's a lot of evil that goes on tonight in satanical groups around the world. One of these years I'll probably just focus on that on Halloween and how wicked and evil, as they remember, whether they realize it or not, what they're celebrating. Trick or treat. On Halloween night, the people would set foot outside to placate the spirits who were always hungry. If you didn't treat them with something they like, they might be angry and punish or trick you. Ghosts, goblins, fairies, demons, sprites, and spirits were just some of the beings Druids thought they could contact. Some were supposed to be good, while others were evil. In the USA, Halloween did not become popular until the mid-1800s, when large groups of Irish and Scottish immigrants introduced their specific customs for celebrating Halloween. It didn't take long for this young nation to be polluted with practices and remembrance of the wicked. It didn't take long at all. It doesn't surprise me where it came from. Because if you know anything about the lost tribes of Israel, those tribes migrated in different directions, but predominantly from the Middle East, the Persia area, towards the Atlantic Ocean. And along with them came all the evil practices they practiced all the way back in Israel prior to their capture and taken into bondage by the Assyrians. God detests them. That's why he divorced them in the Old Testament, for their continuous evil practice of the occult, as we would use the name today, from sacrificing their babies and children to these false gods, to other evil practices they engaged in. They were a wicked bunch. God divorced them. But Jesus did say, I came for the lost house of Israel. They were lost. Unfortunately, a lot of their lost practices still remain intact. And coming from Scotland and Ireland, it was reintroduced into this country in the mid-1800s. In 1965, the Satanic Bible was first published. 4 years later, in 1969, the First Church of Satan was formed. With the revival of the old Celtic-style witchcraft in Missouri and North Carolina, Satanism and witchcraft has been on the rise in the USA. They don't even hide it any longer. It's out in the open. Witchcraft and sorcery are very real. The number of occult-related murders have been on the increase in this country for more than a generation. One of the most celebrated occult dates is Halloween. On college campuses and universities today, the Satanic Bible often outsells the Bible itself. And like I said, I'm not going to get into this Halloween, but these practices started thousands of years ago. I think they were just reintroduced after the flood. Once again, they actually started before the flood. But after the flood, it kicked into gear again. And you'll see, when I get to it again in the future, how it developed. And how all these pagan festivities and the way they are celebrated, plus the calendar dates that was used back then and now, today, falls on these particular dates that we celebrated. I don't, but many do. There was not always a time that I was privy to this information. But once you know the truth, you can brush it off as no big deal. Well, put it this way. If you knew something was offered to the moon god, religion, as food. Would you so easily consume it? Especially if you had a choice not to. Same goes with all these pagan practices. We should always be on guard against the true paganism creeping into the church, and boy has it. But likewise be on guard to anti-pagan hysteria dividing the body of Christ. Most of the traditions associated with Halloween are pagan in origin. Should we nullify them? There's one thing to think about. If nothing of the traditions of Halloween were pagan, they would be allowable. But every other holiday honors something good. America's independence, Jesus Christ's birth or sacrifice for us, mothers and fathers, etc. Halloween is the only holiday that celebrates evil and focuses on fear. The attitude taught by this holiday is not God-honoring. It is, if you don't give me what I want, I will destroy your property. Now, not everybody practices that, but that's basically, and I didn't spend much time on the trick-or-treat part of it, but the people that celebrated this day not that very long ago were in fear of the spirits. They were in fear of demons and goblins and ghosts and all sorts of things. That if you didn't give what it want, they would wreak havoc in your life. That's where the fear came in. So, instead of resisting that evil, they succumbed to it. And they celebrated this holiday which focuses on evil and fear. That's its origins, my friend. If you don't give me what I want, you'll get the trick, the destruction. Now, I believe, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we shouldn't operate that way, obviously. We should focus things that honors God, not evil. Adolf Hitler massacred millions of Jews in World War II. It is horrible to realize there are thousands of neo-Nazis, actually a lot more than that celebrate Adolf Hitler's birthday, April 19th, as a holiday because they believe in what he was trying to do. If the Druids were guilty of human sacrifice for centuries, should we be celebrating Halloween with things connected to their activities? The last thing we would want is for Judaism revived as a modern religion and then to revive the old ways of murdering the innocent. And the way the world's going, that is not a far-fetched idea anymore, my friends. Now, that's enough of that. Let's see if I could find something in here to add to it. If not, I'll close out with that. But here's another author. Paul warned the Galatian Christians, who were Celtic people, not to keep their old pagan holidays. Paul seems to wonder if they kept the pagan holidays, Halloween being the chief one. If they were truly Christian, or did he waste his time preaching to them? Well, where do you get that? Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 through 11. This is a different version than the King James translation, but I'll read this version. Verses 8 through 11. However, at the time when you did not know God, you were slaves to those which by nature are no gods. But now that you have come to know God, or rather come to be known by God, how is it that you turn back again to the weak and worthless elemental things, to which you desire to be enslaved all over again? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that perhaps I've labored over you in vain. Now, some of this is referring to the law, but there's other things that these Galatians, in fact, all the churches in Asia Minor are falling into the same wicked trap of reverting back to the practices before they became saved. And Paul's saying, I fear for you. Perhaps I labored over you in vain. Was it all for naught? Why would you go back to these practices? Now, I'm not saying anybody that listens to me is practicing the Halloween rituals of the old days. For most people listening to me, you're just giving out candy because you're seeing the kids come to the door and they're cute and you want to give them something, some sweet or some candy or whatever you give out. At the very least, you should add some informational cards to that. Who knows? Maybe their parents will watch and they'll wise up concerning the things of God and His Word. But a lot of these things came from evil origins. We've kind of whitewashed them in this country through the decades. I would train, if you want to keep practicing doing these things and send your kids out, don't say trick or treat. Be honest. I'm here for some candy. Please. You're getting extreme. No, I'm not. I'm just giving you information. You do what you want with it. It took me years to get to this point. And to tell you the truth, until I really dug in many years ago into the moon god history and how this also is related to the moon god festivities, that's for another time. Changed somewhat from a Catholic standpoint, but very similar. If the celebration, because, by the way, in Galatia, they were also celebrating the souls of the dead. And if the celebration of Halloween among the Galatian Christians so shocked Paul that he didn't know if they were truly saved, then the question is, should we even practice it? Well, like I said, that's for you to decide. And I'm sure I made some people aggravated because they really get into Halloween. And I understand why you did. Because it's been packaged differently. But know its origins. Know where it came from. Know where a jack-o'-lantern used to mean. I wouldn't doubt in some satanic cults, it still means that. Maybe they don't sacrifice a human, but I'm sure they sacrifice an animal. They get their fat so it can burn all night long. And we have churches that participate in all this. Woe to those shepherds that don't enlighten their congregations to the things that, in my point of view, and you might not agree with me, doesn't honor God at all. God's not about evil and fear. He sent his son Jesus to deliver us from that. Now, this really is just an introduction to Halloween, and maybe next year I'll continue with it and go a little deeper. I just touched on certain little things, certain things concerning how this holiday has been practiced through its history. Maybe next year we'll go a little bit deeper to solidify all this information and to show you it's not all what you think it is. Now, if you're not that aggravated with me, I want to hear from you. Play a song.